Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ and Friends. Today, my friend is Dr. Rosane Oliveira. Dr. Oliveira is the founder and CEO of the nonprofit Plant-Based Life Foundation, where she teaches individuals how to adopt better habits on their journey towards a more plant-based lifestyle. And she also teaches lifestyle medicine at UC Davis Medical School and plant-based living at Stanford's Community Education Program. And today she's going to be talking about the battle of the sexes, age versus pounds. For those of you that attended our live Live Your Best Life conference, you know she was scheduled to speak and unfortunately wasn't able to make it. So through her generosity, she's not just giving the lecture to those that attended the conference, but to everyone. Please welcome her to the show. It's so nice to see you. You're not being able to attend is everyone's benefit.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, AJ. Yes, when I knew that I couldn't attend anymore, then I offered AJ. I told her I would be glad to give this talk on Zoom anytime. And she said, well, let's do a YouTube show so that everybody else can hear the talk. So here we are, and I'm very excited to be here. You know how much I love working with you. I love being in your show, and I'm very happy to be here today.
Well, I can't wait. And I love your presentation. So I'm just going to sit back and watch like everyone else.
Okay, so let me just quickly start my slides here. And I assume that you can see my slides, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So Battle of the Sexes. Let me just start by explaining why I chose to title my lecture that. And it came from the Battle of the Sex tennis match that happened over 50 years ago. I was just barely born. And it was a match between Billie Jean King, who was 29 at the time, and Bobby Riggs, who was 55. And a few months before that, he had played the #1 in the world, the woman tennis player, Margaret Court from Australia, and he beat her. Margaret Court was 23 and he was 55. And then came Billie Jean King. He was invited her to play the tennis and she didn't want to. And she said, you know what? I'll play you. And the story goes that because he beat Margaret Court, who was half his age, so easily that he didn't practice this time, he didn't train. And at least that's what they say. But long story short, Billie Jean King beat him in 3 straight sets. And then when I hear this story, we know there's a big difference in physiology between men and women. And how is it that a man that is twice as old as Margaret Court can beat her? Because of those differences. And many times we don't want to accept some of those differences, but they exist. And when we talk about weight loss, we need to remember that. And then that also made me think of this quote. I actually knew another one, but that the original quote is this one from 1930s. They said, you've got to be twice as good as a man to get half as far. And leaving all other areas in our lives aside, I know that when it comes to weight loss, I believe that many women have experienced that we feel like we are doing twice as much as men. We are looking at what we eat, when we eat, we are exercising, and then men, and we go half as far as when compared to men. We see that if a couple, a man and a woman, decide to start on a weight loss journey together, the man usually is going to lose a lot more weight and a lot faster than a woman. And men have a less hard time maintaining their weight off than women do. So that's why the presentation has this title. And I'm going to divide this talk into 3 parts. The first part, I'm going to be talking about weight loss, and more importantly, some things that people may not know or may have forgotten when it comes to weight loss, the things that matter, so we know what happens to our body when we lose weight. Then I'm going to talk about the 3 stages, the 3 main stages of a woman's life, and how those stages are very different when we compare a woman and a man's life and body. And then we're going to end by discussing a little bit of genetics of obesity, so we have a round idea of where we are when it comes to weight gain and loss in a woman's life. So we'll start by discussing weight loss. And when we think about weight loss, or when we hear advice from experts, usually people think that weight loss is a numbers game, which means if you eat less and you move more, you will lose weight. But the reality is so much more nuanced than that. Just a quick overview, like when we look at the total energy expenditure for a woman or a man, about 60% of the energy we expend on any given day is what we call basal metabolic rate. That is dependent on our size, the size of a body. So if we are bigger, we are going to expend more energy. If we're smaller, we're going to spend less energy. And when we call the energy expended from physical activity is about 30%. But physical activity is not the same as exercise. Physical activity is everything that we do throughout the day, like me giving this presentation right now, or as preparing food, gardening, walking to a store. All of this is physical activity. Exercise is a subset of physical activity. And when people think that I'm going to go on this weight loss journey, they think, yes, I'm going to eat less and I'm going to exercise more. And they think that both sides of the scale work the same, but it doesn't. So physical energy expended from physical activity includes NEAT, which is non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or how many calories we are burning through activities that are not exercise plus exercise. Exercise alone can be, I think, around maybe 10 or 15%. That's the estimate, which means we have 100% control over the food we eat, but we only have control over up to 30% of the energy that we expend. Everything else is accounted for. So it's not a numbers game, because both sides of the scale don't work the same way. And when we focus on calorie restriction, or we do calorie restriction with exercise, those are the two main ways that people try to lose weight. There's a difference in the rate in which weight loss happens. Just to give an example, see, this was an experiment that it was done with 4 different groups. And the main outcome was actually not looking at weight loss. The outcome, what they wanted to look at, is how weight loss, or how restricting calories, more precisely, would affect markers of longevity. Because research shows that if you reduce calories, that you may reduce metabolic rate, and a reduced metabolic rate may lead to living longer. So that's what they wanted to do. And they wanted to see, how should we go about it? Should we really reduce calories drastically, which you see there in a red line, or should we just reduce calories long enough so that we can lose weight at a regular pace? Should we do it with exercise, or should we do anything, which is the control group? And what the calorie restriction group did is they reduced their consumption of calories by 25%. And the calorie restriction plus exercise group, what they did is they reduced the number of calories they were eating by 12.5%, and they increased the amount of exercise that they were doing by 12.5%. And we can see that even though both groups would have a deficit of 25%, when we do exercise and calorie restriction at the same time, weight loss happens a little slower. Of course, after 3 months, both groups will catch up. But this is something that many women may have experienced in their life. Like, they are exercising, they are cutting calories, but they seem not to lose weight as fast, as if they are just focusing on calorie restriction. But here's the most important thing that I want to talk to you about. the very low calorie diet, this group, they were consuming about 900 calories a day. And they did that, so they lost weight a lot more rapidly. And the goal was to lose weight until they lost about 10% of the body weight and then trying to maintain their weight. And here again, they are not very much interested in weight loss. They just want to see longevity markers or biomarkers of longevity. But it doesn't matter how you're losing weight or the pace that you're losing weight. The thing that happens is anytime we lose weight, there are metabolic adaptations that we don't discuss much, but they're so important for us to understand why it's so difficult, if not impossible, to keep the weight off if we are only focusing on how many calories we are eating or how much food we are eating, or what we call calorie restriction. So after 10% weight loss, there's a reduction in our basal metabolic rate by about 15%. But then you would say, but Rosane, didn't you just say that if we have a smaller frame, if you have a smaller body, that we will then expand less at rest? And it's true, but this 15% reduction is in comparison to someone who is right now at the same weight that you are after you lost 10% of your weight, but that person has never have to lose the weight to be at, or that person has never gained weight and have to lose. So when two people are 120 pounds, for example, 130 pounds, the person who is 130 pounds, but it is at that weight right now because she lost some weight to get to 130 pounds, her basal metabolic rate is going to be 15% lower compared to someone who has always been 130 pounds, for example. And the same is true when we looked at energy expended from physical activity, except that the reduction is even higher, is about 25% reduction. So two people, the same weight, the person that lost the weight should be now at an equivalent weight, it expends 15% less energy at rest and 25% less energy when exercising. And when we looked at the number of calories that we would need, for example, the calorie needs are reduced by 22%, which means if you lost weight and now two people are 130 pounds a person and you eat the same number of calories and you exercise or you are just as physically active, if you are now 130 but you had to lose weight to be at that weight and you lost weight by restricting calories, you very likely going to gain weight. You would have to eat a lot less than someone that has always been 130 pounds to maintain your weight. And I say, it makes no sense. I'm spending less to survive my basal metabolic rate. I'm spending less exercising and such. Shouldn't I also want to eat less because my caloric needs are 22% lower? But that's not, it happens. So in studies done with functional MRI, meaning it's MRI done in the brain that can see the function of the brain and can see different areas of the brain lighting up towards looking at specific food cues. And what research shows is that people who had lost 10% of their body weight had much higher responses to food cues than those who hadn't lost weight. So in one side of the equation, here you are spending less at rest and by when you are physically active. And on the counter of it, you have more, you want food more, so you're hungrier than before. So for you to understand that, so energy balance is controlled in a part of our brain called the hypothalamus. And there are two, and before I talked about the hormones responsible for this energy balance, think about, again, a scale. Energy balance is this equation between the energy or the energy that we expend every day at rest or by being physically active, and the food that we eat, what they like to say, calories out and calories in. But again, we know that those two variables are not independent, and they do not behave the same. So, but energy balance then is regulated by two main hormones, ghrelin on one side and leptin on the other side. But leptin is way more stronger when it comes to helping us going back to the weight that we were originally. So leptin is the one that, if I were to just talk about all the research that exists on leptin, I could give a talk just on leptin alone. But today we're just going to understand the bigger picture. So ghrelin is produced in the stomach. Leptin is produced by our fat cells. When ghrelin is high and leptin is low, we are hungry. When ghrelin is low and leptin is high, we are satiated. So we don't feel like eating more. Here's what happened. Anytime we lose weight by restricting calories, our bodies adapt. Remember, I said metabolic adaptations occur so that ghrelin is always high and leptin is always low, which means we are always hungry, which means we will always want to eat more. So that's why we can do our best and we can get some results in the first 3 to 6 months maximum, but we are always going to reach a plateau and we are going to start gaining the weight back because of those metabolic adaptations. The body wants us to go back to our original weight, because when we lose fat, when we're losing weight, then leptin comes down, and then our brain was adapted to a certain level of leptin and a certain level of eating and expending energy. And now it's trying like crazy to see this person is starving. We need to make sure this person is going to survive. We need to make sure she can save as much energy as possible and that she has the drive to eat more so we can go back to that weight. So anyone who's reduced weight by diet or any other means, including surgery, right, tends to regain the weight with very high accuracy. And these researchers that started doing, like Ruby Leibel, who started doing this work in the 80s and 90s, he says his team has followed people after weight loss for 5-6 years. And the same exact metabolic adaptations seem to be around even 5 or 6 years. So same lowering of energy expenditure and increased drive to eat. So when we talk about why is it that a whole food plant-based diet can or has the potential to not only help you lose weight and keep the weight off, we very often focus on the fact that whole plant foods are less calorie or less energy dense compared to animal foods. And it's true, and you may have seen a chart like this saying focus on eating the foods that are whole plant foods. There are fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes that are naturally lower in calorie. And then we say avoid foods like bread and chocolate and oils because they are more energy dense. But the biggest reason why whole plant foods help us not only lose weight, but keep the weight off is that that's one thing that is missing in all processed food and in all animal foods, and it's fiber. So this is the main reason why whole plant foods can help us. So it's not about being vegan and avoiding animal foods. And this is such a disservice when we talk about being plant-based or whole food plant-based. It's just people think they are the same. That's why sometimes when we're just focusing on reducing or eliminating animal foods, we can still struggle with our weight because we are not focusing on whole plant foods that have fiber. So why is it so important for us to eat fiber? Because fiber is food for our gut microbiota. Anytime we feed our gut microbiota with fiber or resistant starches, what they do is they help us digest those foods that we cannot digest ourselves, and they produce some metabolites called short-chain fatty acids, 3 of them mainly, acetate, butyrate, and propionate. Each one of them help us in a different way, but what these short-chain fatty acids help us do is pure magic, because they help us maintain ghrelin levels low and leptin levels high. So they've done some research where they show that the consumption of 25 grams of fiber, which is more or less the recommended amount of fiber that someone should eat in a day. Usually the recommendation is about 28 grams on average. So 24 grams of fiber, if you measure ghrelin levels 4 hours later, it is the equivalent of you having eaten 500 calories. And this is if the consumption of fiber is just fiber with no calories. And there are foods out there that exist that are pure fiber with no calories. So that is, it helps us with satiety. But ghrelin is a hunger hormone that works between meal and meal, between meals. And like, for example, ghrelin, it's highest right before lunch, and it goes down after we eat. And then for dinner, ghrelin, right before dinner, ghrelin may be high again. But leptin is a long-term regulator of food intake, so to speak. So it has a more long-term effect on us. So anytime we do things that we know can regulate levels of leptin, we are going to be in way better shape than if we focus on ghrelin. And when we look at all the hormones that regulate food or food intake or appetite and satiety, we see that the body has like ghrelin to stimulate appetite, but it has 4 or 5 other hormones to bring food intake down or to keep us satiated, what they call anorectic hormones, meaning that they suppress our hunger, and leptin is one of them. So short-chain fatty acids, those metabolites they are produced in our gut microbiota when we eat fiber, they stimulate the production of leptin, but not just leptin, also peptide YY that is produced in, so leptin is produced in fat cells, peptide YY in our intestines, and also produce GLP-1, which is produced in the L cells in our intestines. And I know that in the past 2 years, more and more people are talking about what are the Ozempic and on drugs that are similar. Ozempic and all of this weight loss injections, they are GLP-1 analogs. I'm not saying that if you eat fiber, you're going to get the same amount of GLP-1 analog as if you get an injection, but one of the ways that those injections work is they suppress appetite. Your brain and your desire, you may want to eat more, but you just can't. You bring down your appetite, and that's one of the reasons why people, it's not the whole story, but it's one of the reasons why those injections work. Right, now that we are done talking about it, and I say, I know that it may sound like, oh, you're only sharing bad news. It's going to get worse in the second part of the talk, but in reality is that if I don't tell you what things are and the way they are, I cannot help you. And then unless you understand what is happening in your body, it's going to be very hard for you to know what kind of commitment is necessary for you to get what you want and be successful in that journey if weight loss and weight maintenance is something that is one of your highest goals right now. So the second part of the talk, then we're talking about stages of life. We're going to focus on 3 main stages of life. You're going to understand in a woman's life that women are not just prone to gain weight, they are prone to gain fat mass. So the very first stage in a woman's life where the increase in fat mass occurs is during puberty. This lady, this researcher, Rose Frisch, in the 1970s, she was the first one to show that body fat was linked to fertility, meaning that women need body fat in order to be able to become mothers. In fact, she was the first one to show that right before a girl has her first period, she has 120% jump in the amount of body fat, and they gain on average 13 pounds of fat. This is crucial. Without this jump in body fat, a girl would not have her first period, and a woman wouldn't be able to then have kids. And the opposite happens with boys, if we think about it, right? Even boys, they may have some love handles here and there and a little fat. When they enter puberty, what happens is levels of testosterone shoot up. Usually they become taller, they gain a lot more muscle mass, and then they lose fat. So while boys are losing fat, girls are gaining fat. And then when we looked at the difference in the percentage of body fat between a man and a woman, we say is very different. The levels of fitness and athletes, for example. That's why ballerinas and women who are engaged in endurance sports, the ones that tend to be a lot leaner and have a lot less body fat, when they want to get pregnant, sometimes they need to stop training. They need to gain some fat back in order to be able to gain that. So it's calculated, I didn't say that before, I should have mentioned in before, for a girl to have her first period, she needs to have at least 17% body fat. And for a girl to continue to have her periods, she needs to have a body fat around 22%. Right, the second moment or the second life stage where a woman is going to gain body fat, it's not just weight, but body fat, is going to be during pregnancy. And even though we know that is the recommended weight gain during pregnancy, if a woman's having just one baby, is going to be between 25 and 35 pounds, or between 37 and 54 pounds if a woman is having twins. But 1 in 3 women gain the recommended amount of weight during pregnancy. 1 in 5 women, or 25%, are going to gain less. But about 50% of women are going to gain more than that. And if we had a different environment when it comes to the food we eat today, it could be that after pregnancy, our weight will go back very close to where we started. But then we're going to get pregnant again. Many women choose to have more than one child. We're going to gain the weight again. What is happening today is that a lot of women, they lose some weight after the first child, but they don't quite get to the original weight before they got pregnant in the first place. And then in the second or third pregnancy, they regain the weight, and sometimes they gain a little bit more in every pregnancy. And going back to what we talked before, we need to understand that after the hard work of shedding fat, or at least reducing the amount of fat in the body, because we don't lose fat cells, as I'm going to be talking to you about that next, we have to work harder than those who have not dieted to keep it off, and are forever at higher risk of getting it back because of all the metabolic adaptations I've just discussed. But even a temporary weight gain can have lifelong experiences. And I don't know any other stage of a woman's life when she does not need to go through at least a temporary weight gain, and that is during pregnancy. And as I said, so I discussed the difference, the metabolic adaptations that happen, and I say the main regulator of our weight and the main hormone that can make it or break it or help us be successful or not is leptin. The levels of leptin are the ones that are either driving our hunger or keeping us satiated. And leptin is produced by our fat cells. So the number or the amount of fat cells we have in our bodies and how much fat we hold in each one of those cells will be a big determinant in our way, whether we're going to succeed or not. So I like to use the balloon analogy. I know that in past conversations I've had with Chef AJ that we discussed this. So think about our fat cells as balloons. if two people are 130 pounds, for example, but one has never gained weight and had to lose, she's always been around 130 pounds, and she has, I don't know, maybe 25 balloons, just to give an example. The other person who now is 130, maybe she's 130, but she had to lose 50 pounds to get to 130. So she, in the past, for a period of time, even if it was transient, if it was 6 months or 9 months because of a pregnancy, or it was over the course of 2, 3, 4 years, she had to lose 50 pounds. So she, instead of 25 balloons, she can have 40 or maybe 50, maybe twice as many. I don't know. But she has more of those balloons. The fact is that once when we start accumulating fat, it may be that all it happens at first is that we start accumulating more fat in the same fat cells we have. But as we continue to gain weight, those fat cells start to multiply, and we start needing more cells, more fat cells to store more fat. And when we lose weight, what happens is that the amount of fat in each cell shrinks, but we don't lose the fat cells, meaning it would be the equivalent why someone at 130 pounds has 25 balloons, and those balloons can deflate. But if someone that you used to weigh 180 now is 130, that person may have 50 balloons that now are deflated. But if now I do something like bring in some air, which would be the equivalent of bringing some fat, and I want to fill up those balloons, if I have always been 130 pounds, I only have 25 balloons that can be filled up and produce leptin, whether somebody else may have 50 balloons that now can fill up and produce leptin. So it's a different dance and a different dynamic and regulation of leptin production between two people that have different number of fat cells. All right, and let's say that you were lucky enough to not have gained weight when you enter puberty or in early adulthood. Maybe you either chose not to have children, or you were lucky enough again that every time you got pregnant, you were able to go back to your original weight and such. But there's one phase in a woman's life that no woman will escape, which is menopause. And guess what? It's the third stage where we are metabolically or physiologically programmed to gain fat again. So it's 3 stages where we not just gain weight, we gain fat. So let's just do a recap of what we talked about and understand how this works. So women naturally have a higher body fat and lower muscle mass compared to men. And with age, muscle mass can or tends to diminish, which leads to decreased metabolism. So when we looked at, so after turning 40, women need to eat much less to maintain the weight they had in the 20s and 30s. And now we know that if women gain weight and then lost weight, if they continue to eat as they always have, they are likely to gain weight. So there's those things that happen, metabolic caloric penalty or not, that women are not taught or not. These are things that we are not taught by our mothers or physicians, or we didn't know many of it. Think about it. The research that I mentioned before, they showed the reduction in basal metabolic rate, for example. This came in the late 80s, early 90s. So many of us didn't know that as we were growing up. We are starting to understand that now. And then comes perimenopause, or estrogen levels begins to decline, which may also lead to muscle mass loss and fat deposit in the midsection. Why? Because why we are gaining mass either during puberty, pregnancy, or all the way until we get to be perimenopause, estrogen makes sure that this extra fat first is deposited where a woman would need most when it comes to reproduction, which is what? Around the boobs, around the breast, and in our hips. But when estrogen levels come down, then what happens is we start having fat accumulation more like a man has, which is around the midsection. And then we may get the infamous muffin top. But what we need to remember is, why is it that we are prone to gain weight, and not just gain weight, but gain fat in menopause? Is because postmenopausal women in particular rely on their fat to protect their bones, because fat and bone share a common origin in our early development as beings. And what it means is that the body's always needs to, or the stem cells that can originate either fat or bone cells, need to make a decision. What is it that this body needs most right now? Does it need more fat, or does it need more bones? And weight is a big trigger for stem cells to convert more into bone, for example. So going through menopause, our production of estrogen goes down in our ovaries, but then fat produce estrogen as well. And it may be our only or main source of estrogen. So by increasing fat in the bodies, we get two things. One, we have a little bit of estrogen. Estrogen actually protects our bones. And then we tend to gain weight as well as we start to accumulate this fat. And weight is a better predictor of bone mineral density than age, meaning the heavier we are, the stronger our bones are. And we want both, but do we need to gain weight in order to maintain our bones strong? No, we don't. That's why we're going to discuss this next. But here's just a quick picture of what we can expect. There's a very deep drop in the levels of estrogen in around perimenopause and menopause. It only continues to decrease with age. And then so it's not just that we are going to be changing body composition, meaning we are, if we don't do certain things, if we don't look at certain lifestyle changes, including the foods that we are eating, we are going to naturally have more body fat. But it's not just more body fat, it's body composition and fat distribution. Instead of fat being around our breasts and our hips, fat now is going to be in a midsection. So instead of being more pear shape, we may be what we call a nipple shape. And the problem is fat deposit in the midsection leads to insulin resistance, or may lead to insulin resistance and chronic inflammation, because this fat here tends to be fat. We tend to accumulate more visceral fat than the subcutaneous fat. And then insulin resistance plus low-grade chronic inflammation together will drive even more weight gain. It's a vicious cycle, and insulin resistance and low-grade chronic inflammation increase the risk of us developing all of those diseases that usually may happen after menopause, which is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. And then when we looked at the BMI range of 20 to 25, which is considered to be normal, we see there is a marked variability in the level of adiposity in both sexes, which means that the older we get, the tendency is for us to accumulate more fat. So we can see that at the top of the chart, we see BMI lower than 20%. You see males and females, and there's some excess body fat, which is in the light blue, but we can see that within BMI between 20 and 25, increased body fat with age in both sexes. But here's the kicker. I don't know if you're going to like this. Why women experience a very deep drop in estrogen levels around 50, the drop in testosterone levels for men will happen much later in life. And many men don't even experience that much of a drop. It's not just like women, we all going to have like our ovaries stop producing estrogen, but men, it's It varies. Some men may experience a more drastic drop. Some men may not even experience that much of a drop. But even when it happens much later in life, 20, 30 years after it happens to a woman. And then you can see that in this graph. You can see that in the time frame between the age window between 40 and 49, right before menopause. The median age for menopause is 51. About 50% of women already have excess body fat, which means they are normal weight, but they're considered to be obese because they have excess body fat. And excess body fat for women, it's over 32%. For men, is over 25%. So it's a lot of body fat. And the same thing may happen to men, like 50% of men have excess body fat, but 20 years later, in the window between 60 and 69, then we looked at this time window for women, 60 to 69, and now 75% of women have excess body fat. And for men, it takes another 20 years for this to happen, is between ages of 80 and 89. So this goes to show that men and women are very different in their physiology, very different fates when it comes to the amount of fat. And again, what is considered to be excess fat for men is above anything above 25. For women is above 32, but after age 60, maybe even above 35. And we can see that 75% of women have this excess body fat. And then comes, what is it that we can do to that, to correct that, and to lose weight and maintain that weight, the weight loss. And then the advice is the one that we saw before, the one that never works, or eat less and move more, and you're going to get to where you want. Now you know that up until now, we see there's a lot going against us, not just our physiology, but even how weight loss works and all the metabolic adaptations that happen. And then, so what I want you to remember is exercise is crucial because it helps improve and maintain health and physical fitness, cardiovascular fitness, musculoskeletal fitness. But weight loss is, exercise is not a weight loss tool, but it is very important for weight maintenance, weight loss maintenance. So we want to keep it. And for women in perimenopause and menopause, exercise is essential. It's one of the main things we can do and should do in order to preserve not just bone mineral density, but our muscle mass. We tend to think that to prevent fractures and as we age and to have strong bones, all we have to do is focus on bones, but we need to also work on muscles because our muscles go around our bones, make them stronger, and our muscles can also help us from falling, for example. We need both. And exercise is very important for both. So I'm not telling you not to exercise, on the contrary. So what is the bad advice then? Of course, we all want you to become 100% whole food plant-based, not just for your health, not just because it's going to be a lot easier for you to not only lose weight and maintain that weight loss. It's going to help us protect the planet. It's going to help us protect the animals. But if you're not ready to go there, at the very minimum, you need to drastically increase your consumption of fiber-rich whole plant foods. And the emphasis here is whole plant foods, because if you're eating plant foods that are not whole, you're not getting fiber. And there's absolutely no fiber in animal food. So you need to eat more whole plant foods, and you need to also drastically decrease your consumption of animal-based foods and tropical oils. Include coconut oil and palm oil, because those are two plant-based oils, but they're not good. They're very high in saturated fat. This is the subject of another discussion, how saturated fat leads to weight gain. So it's the two things that we need. We need high fiber and low saturated fat to lose weight and keep the weight off. And then if you want something else that you can do and add to your lifestyle changes, it is to change when you eat. Try to limit your consumption of foods to a window of what we call eating window of no more than 10 hours a day. And on average, Americans eat for 15 hours or more a day. Try to shorten that. If you start at 8, you have to stop at 6 p.m., for example. If you start at 10, then at 8. But the other thing to remember is the best is if you can shift and consume most of your calories earlier in the day. So you may notice that I'm not saying to focus on how much you're eating. The two best advice that we can give is change what you're eating and when you're eating, not how much you are eating. So in this study, it was a 12-week randomized controlled trial with women, overweight women over the ages of 30 and 57, which include two of the major shifts like pregnancy and menopause right there. And you see that they were eating the exact same number of calories every single day, same diet. The difference is there was a breakfast group and a dinner group, meaning the bulk of the calories were either eaten at breakfast or dinner, 700 calories for breakfast or dinner. And the group that ate 700 calories for dinner lost 8 pounds over the course of 12 weeks and lost about 1.5 inches from their waist. And we know that waist is where we want to focus our attention here. But the group that ate 700 calories for breakfast lost 19 pounds in the same time, 12 weeks, and 3.5 inches in the waist. So there is a difference when our calories are eaten. It's not just what we eat, but when we eat, it's very important too. And it may be something else that it's going to make a big difference for women, especially after menopause. So in response to meal challenges, the overall daily glucose, insulin, ghrelin, and mean hunger scores were significantly lower in the breakfast group, and satiety was significantly higher in the same group. And also we said that mean triglyceride levels shoot up or dropped 90 points in the breakfast group and was 26 points higher in the dinner group. So even there's even an effect on our biomarkers or metabolic health, but more specifically triglyceride level. So eating the same food. Before I go into genetics, I just want to spend 30 seconds here and talk about the difference also in mental load. So mental load is the burden of keeping in mind all the details of life. And mental load, women carry that mental load disproportionately more than men. And it's not men's fault. I'm not saying it is. Nowadays, men share chores, they share responsibilities when it comes to raising children and doing things in the household. There's something about women that we're always keeping everything in our minds. Who needs to be dropped off when? What is happening? Who has a recital? I need to buy food. I need to do that. And think about it. We are responsible not only to give birth, but make sure that our babies will survive. We always need to be 5 steps ahead to make sure that we'll survive. But what research is being showing now, and it's very early stages, and I think this research have been done in the past, 10, 15 years, that shows that high cognitive load is associated with reduced capacity to exercise willpower and make long-term decisions, as well as increased anxiety and stress. So to me, it's a perfect storm. Not only are we programmed to gain fat at 3 different time stages, but the mental load that we tend to carry more disproportionately compared to men makes it harder for us to make better choices right now. They are going to have long-term consequences. And we also know that some people are more prone to or have harder time dealing with stress and anxiety. And we know that stress and anxiety may drive some people to eat in order to get some comfort. So we can see that it's not a perfect scenario, and we need to be aware of that. Okay, now quickly, before we finish, let me just talk about genetics. There's two forms of obesity, what we call monogenic and polygenic. Monogenic means it's obesity due to one gene. It usually happens very early on. It affects very young children, and it's what we call very severe obesity. And usually the only way that we can counter that is by giving the children something that they are missing. They have a mutation that, for example, one such is there are kids that are born without producing leptin. So, and then they need that in order to be able to lose the weight. But the common obesity that we talked is polygenic, meaning many genes are responsible for it, is a modest genetic contribution, hundreds of variants and many different genes are responsible versus one. And each variant has a very small effect, and this is key. Environment is a key determinant when it comes to the common obesity versus the polygenic one. You may have heard this quote before. This was the original quote, came from George Bray, who is believed to be the father of obesity science. And it's so fitting that he was the one, he was a geneticist, I believe, also. And he was the first one to say, yeah, genes load the gun and environment pulls the trigger. And this is the environment that we have right now. 63% of calories consumed in this country come from processed food. They have added fat, oil, sugar, salt. 25% of calories are coming from animal foods. It has absolutely zero fiber. 12% is coming from plant foods, but only half is coming from whole plant foods. About 60% of calories are coming from plants that have fiber. And here is the problem. We say without any doubt that obesity is a normal response from a body to an abnormal environment, which means we humans have been selected. We are here today because in our ancestors, some of them had that drive to eat. We needed to have the drive to eat so that we could eat and accumulate some reserves for a rainy day. And in the past, it used to be that it was very hard for us to accumulate enough for a rainy day. What changed in the past 50 to 60 years is that now it's very easy with the food. Our food choices makes it in a way that we can accumulate more. And it's true for most humans on this planet. If we start eating certain foods, this is the abnormal environment, those foods. So when we looked at difference between like what is the chance or likelihood of children to be overweight if they have two biological parents who are overweight, and is 24% more likely to be overweight in those conditions. But about 21% of children who are raised by parents, they are not their biological parents, they also are more likely to be overweight. So this is the first indication that it's not in the genes, is the environment where the children are raised. And then this particular research looked at birth weight and to see if in vitro fertilized babies were more prone or more likely to have the same weight as the biological mother, the one that donated the egg, the one that donated the DNA, where the DNA comes from, or the weight of the surrogate mother. And what it was shown is the environment provided by the human mother is more important than her genetic contribution to birth weight. And they went a step further in a different research to see what about women who had bariatric surgery, but had children before the surgery and after the surgery. And the results show that the children who were born when their mother weighed 100 pounds more which means before bariatric surgery, exhibit higher rates of inflammation and 3 times the risk of severe obesity. 3 times the risk is like 300% higher risk of severe obesity. So a quick recap of what we discussed today. After 10% weight loss, our basal metabolic rate tends to be 15% lower. The energy that we expend through physical activity tends to be 25% lower, and our caloric needs tend to be 22% lower compared to someone that has been at this weight their whole life. And by the way, the research done to look at caloric needs was done with people that were lean and overweight. The metabolic adaptations happen if you lose 10% of your weight, even if you're at your ideal weight. If we focus on calorie restriction, what is going to happen is 2 hormones are going to be in ways that we don't want them to be: ghrelin high and leptin low. And when we consume a high fiber diet, it's a better chance. It's a bet to keep leptin at the levels that can keep our satiety at bay, or food intake at bay. When it comes to stages of life, women go through 3 different stages where they are not just prone to gain weight, but gain fat mass, gain weight from accumulating more fat. And that's puberty, pregnancy, and menopause. No man goes through those phases. After the hard work of shedding fat, we have to work harder than those who have not dieted to keep it off, and a forever higher risk of getting it back. And even a temporary weight gain can have lifelong consequences. Genes load the gun, but the environment pulls the trigger. So when we have control of the environment, and the best control that we have is focusing on consuming whole plant foods. And ideally, especially if you are having the effects of those metabolic adaptations I discussed before, if you can eliminate added sugar, oil, and salt from your diet, your results may be even better. Before I finish, I just want to give you some good news too. So genes are nice, good genes are nice, but joy is better. So many studies have shown that level of satisfaction with their relationships at age 50 are a better predictor of physical health at age 80 than their cholesterol levels were. And this is where we women thrive. This is the biggest difference between us and men. We know how to build lifelong, not that men don't, but it's something that is very much inherent to being a woman. We know how to create a tribe, how to create a group, how to support one another, how to help one another. So this is my invitation for you to do this. Think that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. If you want to lose weight and keep it off, the best way to do it is with other women. It's not just because they're going to understand your journey, they're going to be able to help you and give you a pep talk. But we know research shows that whenever we have a buddy and we work together with somebody else, our chances of not just losing weight, but keeping off are a lot higher. And this is where we women excel. We know how to hold this friendship. So my invitation to you is find a group where women are already meeting and they can help you. Chef AJ has her online group, and she also has a very active community around here in Sacramento where they meet once or twice a month, and she can tell you more about it. People bring whole food plant-based, SOS free most of the time, and do that. Find a supportive group to help you. This is something that is very easy for us women to do, and it's killer. It's going to make all the difference in your journey. We also have an online community. If you want to join us through our foundation, Plant-Based Life Foundation, you can go to our website, pblife.org. You clicked on join the movement, and then you log in, create an account, and it's free to join. You can also use this QR code. After the lecture, you can go back and use this. And my last piece of advice, or the last thing I want to share with you is this. I know that it's very tempting for us to focus on trying to lose weight and keeping it off. But the best thing we can do for ourselves is focusing first on our health, on our wellness, on our level of happiness. Because when we focus on our health, weight loss is going to be a consequence of it. We can lose weight following almost any diet. And as I told you before, and you now can understand, is up until we lose 10% of our weight, the first 3 months, for example, we will succeed. But there are so many forces wanting us to regain that weight. We are going through different life stages that even if we succeed in the first one, the second will show up. If we succeed in the second one, we need to be ready for the third phase. And the best way we can succeed and be happy about this journey is focusing first on our health. And being healthy is not a goal. The same way that being whole food plant-based, it's not a diet. It's a way of living. And I invite you all to join us. And I'm here to answer any and all questions that you may have.
Well, that was depressing.
Yeah.
Maybe it's better you didn't speak at the conference. No, I'm just kidding, of course. You know, what you talked about, you've talked about a little bit in the past 6 years of the Truth About Weight Loss Summit, and other doctors talked about it. I believe they called it something like calorie penalty or metabolic disadvantage. So my top question is, does this ever get better, or is it because very few people that lose weight keep it off? It's not really something that they can easily study.
I think it's two things. One is that when you look at research done by Dr. Leibel, for example, Dr. Rosenbaum at Rockefeller Center, they say they followed people that lost weight for 5-6 years, and they could see the metabolic adaptations were still there. They had not gone back. But all this research was done on people that were following a more standard diet. And here we are saying that we can see that we can counter those metabolic adaptations when we are focusing on eating high fiber plant foods. But we also know that women are going through different stages of life, and especially menopause. And we have been seeing some studies done on menopausal women specifically, but it's not as many in number compared to other studies that are done in men. For many years, all of these studies were done with men only, because it was very hard for them to take into consideration women's menstrual cycles through the research to see is women are retaining water a specific time in the month, and they are, they may be hungrier at different types of the month. It's very hard to interpret results when there's so much variation, and women go through those variations throughout their life while they still having their cycles. And then after menopause, then everything's different again. And we just don't have enough studies. I like to see that positive in everything. I like to believe that, yes, if you are following 100% whole food, avoiding added sugar, oil, and salt, that yes, you can see it, but you're probably relying on the work of your gut microbiota. It's your gut microbiota just producing more and more of those short chain fatty acids. There's keeping those metabolic adaptations at bay. If you stop eating that fiber, you may go back to before. So I don't know. I remember reading studies 5 or 10 years ago, the studies coming from Brazil showing that obesity may leave a scar in the part of the brain that is responsible for regulating energy metabolism, the hypothalamus. So what is it that this scar can do? They could see it. And so I don't know. I like to believe that, yes, through lifestyle changes, we can keep those metabolic adaptations at bay. But you and others who have to lose a lot of weight in your lifetime, you may know that if you start eating differently, the weight will come back.
Well, that would be so cool if they could study this. How has your experience with your identical twin sister helped you understand this topic?
Yeah, so originally I was going to have some slides about that. And then I say, no way I'll be able to finish in an hour if I add those. But what I saw is that, so if you don't know, I was born with an identical twin sister. And up until our early 20s, we weighed the same. And we lived under the same roof. We ate the same thing. So we had very similar lifestyles. And then in our early 20s, I went to spend a semester abroad, which coincided when my sister graduated from law school and then started spending her whole days outside working from 8 in the morning until like midnight. And she was eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner at work. She wasn't eating the food at home. And I was a student living abroad with a very tight budget. So I couldn't buy a lot of food. I had to really budget and buy just what I needed. And so that makes a big difference. But here it is the fact. So then she started gaining weight over the course of her life. And she tried almost any diet you can think under the sun. And you could see she would lose the weight and then the weight would go back. So the yo-yo dieting. And we tend to think that this is happening because you're just not working hard enough. But now you understand that no, the body will do everything it can to bring you back to the original weight. Once you get to a certain, you gain weight and you maintain that weight for a few months or years, it's going to be very hard for you to lose the weight and keep it off unless you are very conscious about your food choices. And it's something that, yeah, it may feel depressing, but once you start doing it, is it depressing for you, AJ, for example? It's not depressing for me. It's something that you learn to do. There's so many things that we women can do. How about focusing? Yes, we have the power. This is the price we pay to have children, for example. I don't know what, so I say, what is the price I'm paying for having to go through menopause? Yeah, it was the price you pay for having had the chance to have a child, even if you chose not to have a child, we still, there are beautiful things that come from this. That's the reason why we accumulate fat more easily and we lose fat in a harder way, but it is what it is. And well, the upside is we tend to outlive men.
That's funny. Well, one of the things Dr. McDougall said is that women die sicker, men die quicker.
Yes. And it may be true when we look at the health, it's women, I believe, because we need to survive in order to maintain for future generations. We're the ones that are always concerned what you're going to eat and did you eat enough and such, that we can live, we have more resilience when it comes to our gene expression, that even when we are not so metabolically healthy, we can still live on. And men, when they start being weird and it's not good, yes, out of here. Yeah, and it's true. We've seen that in research.
What caused your sister to gain the weight at the point like in your life? Because I've seen you both like at my house, and I
Yeah.
right now like I cannot tell you guys apart at all.
Yeah. Well, like I said, in our early 20s, I moved abroad for a semester and I continued to be a student for another 10 years, and a very low budget, meaning I had to pay attention to what I was buying, what I was eating, very conscious. And my sister graduated from law school, went into the workforce. She would spend 10, 12 hours out of the house, and she was eating out almost every day. She would eat breakfast, or even if she skipped breakfast, I don't remember, she would eat lunch and dinner at work. She worked at a big corporation, and you know how it is. She was vegetarian already at the time. It's very easy to be vegetarian, but guess what? There's a lot of saturated fat in cheese. And so it's just what you eat. And when you eat, think about it. Are lawyers the most Zen people you know? Is it the most Zen profession? Here I am, a researcher working by myself in a lab under a microscope or doing my gels and sequencing genes and things. It's very different than, and then having a tight budget versus going into a corporation, having a lot more stress, and then eating a completely different diet than is not the food that you eat at home. So I think that was one of the biggest things. It was the foods that she was eating and the stress that also may have caused her to eat more or eat certain foods that she wouldn't have eaten. So
Yeah.
environment.
It's interesting because just a few days ago, I interviewed Dr. Frank Sabatino on his new book, Weight Loss. And one of the things he talked about, which you kind of touched on, but maybe you could expound on, is if you, I always tell people do the least restrictive program you can do that will get you the results you seek. And I
Yes.
never was able to lose weight, eating sugar, oil, and salt.
Yeah.
And so, but that's a lot of people see that as extreme, and there's not a lot of people. And if you think about the whole vegan community, you've got people that are just on a vegan diet, for ethical reasons, which is great. And they may or may not, suffer from health or weight issues. And then you have, a larger portion of people that are just oil free, but the SOS free, I think it trips a lot of people up. They think it's either unnecessary or too difficult, or it's not going to make a difference. But I found for me and other people, that really is the difference.
Yes, to me, it may be that before menopause, you can still get away with more things. I say, if you had to lose 50 pounds or more, I think it's going to, and it is, you are already menopause or you're going through menopause right now. In my experience and seeing not only my sister and my mother through their journeys, it's going to be a lot harder if you keep those foods in your diet because yeah, you think it's just a little bit, it's just one muffin a week or whatever it is. When you get to your weight, you may get away with eating like one little thing a week that you think that, oh yes, I don't want to give this up, but that you may be able to maintain your weight. But while you're trying to lose weight, the more you can pay attention to what you eat, the better. It's just that our bodies change. There's no way around it. And we just need to accept. The quicker we accept, the better we can start making choices that are going to be beneficial to us instead of driving us, deeper into the hole that we then have to get ourselves out of then later. Then to say the truth, yeah, I can still eat nuts and I can eat my bread and all of this, but for my sister, it's very different. I said there was a time in the experiment that we ran, the two of us, and anytime my sister is visiting me, I like to measure things. And then there was a time when we were measuring things and we had one of these devices on our wrist that could see how many calories we were expending, right, over the course of a day. It wasn't precise, but it would give us real-time feedback of how much calories we are getting through eating and expending. And then my sister and I were eating the same thing every day. I would cook, we would sit down, we would eat. So she was under my roof. We would do the same level of exercise or not do any exercise at all, same thing. At the end of the day, I would see my app and it would show at 600 calorie deficit. And it would show 400 calories plus for my sister. And this was so consistent over a few days that I say, I think your tracker is broken. I'm going to switch with you. And we switched. I wore hers and I gave mine to her. And pretty much, which means that it was her tracker and she was tracking what was happening on her phone and I was tracking her things in mine. Same thing happened. At the end of the day, it would show a deficit for me and it would show a plus for her. So it's just different. And certain foods will have certain effects on a few people, so it's up to you. And AJ, you lost a lot of weight, and you say sometimes you can add a few things, you can eat a little bit more different diet, but then you see that your weight goes a little more. So you keep a range. I remember seeing the documentary about that. What's the name of the guy that greeted the children, Mr. something?
Mr. Rogers?
Yes, I remember seeing his documentary on the plane. And then he said, over 30 years, every single day, I weighed myself and my weight was the same. And I say, this would never be the case for women. Because first, when we are having our periods, when we are still having our menstrual cycles, our weight changes depending on the week, right? Some weeks we are retaining more water, some weeks we are hungrier. It changes, it fluctuates, and it fluctuates a lot. And it's the same thing through menopause. I believe some days you're going to eat more or less. It's just a different physiology. I know it sounds like a lot of bad news, but I much rather you hear bad news from me and from you, for example, and then you can do something about it, because we've seen so many people and we've helped so many people lose weight and keep the weight off. We know what is required. Than to only hear good things and then lose weight a lot faster. I have to say that people can lose weight a lot faster sometimes following a different type of diet. But that's true in the first 3 to 6 months. And then guess what? The weight's going to come back.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a question from a live viewer about weight loss, and that is, although slow weight loss is often recommended more than fast weight loss, is fat weight loss ever okay if you regain some weight for a few months after prior weight loss?
Well, so if you lose weight slowly and you are losing some fat as part of the weight loss, because by the way, depending on the diet that you choose, you may be losing water and muscle mass, but not fat, by the way, depending on what you're choosing to eat. But if you regain some weight, will you have those metabolic adaptations and the consequences? It may be that if you lost the weight, you regained the weight just because of those metabolic adaptations. It was probably because you're not eating enough of those foods that can help you protect from it, which is high fiber, one of the things. Or you may have brought more saturated fat into your diet. So high saturated fat and low fiber in your diet invariably will lead to weight gain. There's a small percentage of people that we may see, including women, that you feel like they can eat almost anything and they never gain weight. But it's such a small percent of the population. There is big variability, genetic variability among people and among women. They had a study where, I don't remember, people required to eat, I don't know how many calories more in excess every single day for a long period of time. And the weight gain varied tremendously from 9 pounds to 30 something pounds, which means if you get 100 people, ask all of them to eat a certain amount of excess calories, that people will gain weight differently. That's a given. But it's still within an individual, if you have gained weight in the past, following those 3 life stages or not, and you lost, the metabolic adaptations that happen in our body will be such that will lead you to regain the weight unless you're paying attention to certain lifestyles. And one of the biggest thing is what you choose to put on your plate.
Yeah. It almost seems like people that have become overweight for whatever reason, like they lose weight and then they're still being punished by this system that is in place of making it much more difficult,
Yes, but we only believe that it's punishment now because the environment changed. It's not conducive to us losing weight. There was a time, I was teaching a similar class 2 days ago, and one of the students, and if she's here, she'll know that I'm talking about, she said, my mom had many pregnancies and not all the children survived, in the old days, women went through a lot of pregnancies, and every single time she went back to her weight without any problem. Yeah, there was a time when people grew their own food. They ate whole foods, even when they were not 100% whole food plant-based. But now, if you think of that slide I showed, like 63% of the calories are coming from processed or ultra-processed food. 25% of calories are coming from animal foods. We used to eat differently. So this weight gain that we are seeing now that is harder for us to go back from, it's coming also because we change the environment. So there's no way for us to succeed unless we change the environment. The bad news is that the environment is there for everybody. And if it's something that is hard for us, if we see the food and we want to eat, then it's hard. And if we decide to eat, it's even harder. It's going to be almost impossible for us to lose the weight and keep it off. But if we flip the way we are thinking about it, and I say, listen, I need you paying attention to the environment. What are foods that were considered to be foods 56 years ago? Can I eat those foods? I wouldn't eat anything that came from a package. You know what I mean? So before microwavable dinners, that's the time we want to go back to. So, and if we think about it, then it's not a punishment. The body is adapted to survive in a certain environment. We change the environment, so our gun is just not loaded. We are pulling the trigger within the environment.
That's something. There's a viewer named Healthy Kids, Healthy Planet. That's a nice name. What about the idea that we gain about a pound a year after 40? Couldn't we just accept it? Did nature design us that way for survival? I would argue that not everybody gains a pound a year after 40. You didn't, Dr. Oliveira.
Yes. Well, but there are differences that happen in our bodies. What I like to say is that I focus a lot on my diet up until my 50s, and it was enough. But once you hit perimenopause, then even if you didn't pay attention too much into exercise, you must shift that. That was the biggest shift for me, because it's something necessary. And I get it. It's what she's trying to say is the same as we are aging. It is natural, is going to help to happen. And we should just embrace it. If you embrace it and you're eating certain foods, you're not just embracing and consuming the foods that we find in this environment today, then it's fine. It's just a choice. It's the same choice as I'm going to allow my hair to go gray. I'm going to allow myself to have my wrinkles. Yes, it may be that, yes, I know that I'm going to gain some fat, or I'm going to gain some weight, and it's fine with it. But the thing is, today is so hard for us to say, what is the limit? Am I going to gain 10 pounds and I'm going to be okay with it? I know that if I exercise, if I'm gaining weight or gaining fat, I don't want the fat to come to my midsection because it increases the risk of certain diseases. Think about it in a different way. What is the advantage? I always like to say, in genetics, we always need to say, why does this exist? What is the biological purpose of it? There was a time when, what is the main function of us as species? We are born, then we need to grow as fast as we can. So we get to our reproductive age, then we have babies. And once we have babies and we make sure the babies can survive themselves, there's no point for us to stay here. You know what I mean? So there was a time when men and women will die much younger because, yes, you already did your job, go away. Now you like to think, no, but it's very important that we are here. They need our wisdom, they need our protection, or whatever it is. But when you look at biology, in theory, if you start accumulating body fat and then you start having higher risk of cardiovascular disease, yes, you're going to die, and we're going to have less competition for what you call resources, food and shelter, and you name it. It's just that we survive out of it through our intelligence and all the things that technological changes that have happened. We can live a lot longer, and I think that if we have a way of counter those things that are happening, those metabolic adaptations that are happening with age, then if we can, we should.
Yeah, thank you. Brittany, who's watching live, has a question about medications, and I'm going to make this more general. Her question is, how does prescribed medication for various mental health conditions make weight loss or fat loss harder? But I would just say any kind of medication. Sometimes people have to take long-term steroids or things like that that sometimes can affect their weight.
Yeah. So I'm not a physician, so I'm not going to go into much detail. I know some because, I study to treat animals, so I understand a little bit of physiology and pharmacology as well. But yes, um, it's not just drugs. If we think about it, food is biochemistry. Anytime we eat, we are changing our biochemistry. And drugs are changes in biochemistry, of course. Anything that goes through our lips or inside our bodies, whether it's injected or we take it, is going to have an effect. And yes, and if you're taking any drugs related to mental health, it may have an impact on your weight. And when you look at, for example, I mentioned Ozempic and some of these weight loss drugs, there are some people who have experienced some side effects related to mental health. Some people that have tried Ozempic and got more depressed or more anxious after it. So everything has consequences. Any changes in biochemistry will have consequences. And depending on what neurotransmitters you're producing in your brain before or after something that you try to do or change in your life will have consequences. And you can always discuss those consequences and side effects with your doctors. The way I like to see is if you're eating more whole plant foods, the consequences tend to be more positive than if you're using drugs, but that's my take on it.
Any thoughts on the new weight loss drugs? I don't know if they're so new, Ozempic, things like that. Any experience with them or people that have been on them?
Yes, I've known some people, mostly guys, believe it or not. Here we are saying it's so much easier for men to lose weight and keep the weight off compared to women. And I know a few men actually who are on the drug. What I can see is some of them is just like they are even on the drug. If they're not willing to change their lifestyle, if they're not willing to change what they're eating, there comes a time when they hit a plateau and they are taking the drug now to maintain their weight loss, even if the weight loss was not 100%. Let's say they wanted to lose 40 pounds and they lost 20. They got to a point when they lost 20 and they're not losing more weight, but they continue to take the drug to maintain their weight loss. And they're not changing what they're eating. They're still eating burgers or French fries or pizza, you name it. They are not looking at sleep. We don't talk about sleep as much, but sleep is going to have lack of sleep is going to have a very similar change in ghrelin and leptin as calorie restriction will have. So we need to understand that if you sleep less than 5.5 hours a day, that was what the research was done. They wanted to compare people that slept less than 5.5 hours versus people that slept 8 or 9 hours, and there was an up in ghrelin and lowering of leptin, which is, I don't know if the levels were equivalent to calorie restriction, but what the research shows is that when people sleep less, they tend to eat around 300, at least this research shows. The next day they would come back and they would all be exposed to a buffet. They had healthy choices and unhealthy choices. And lack of sleep makes us not only eat around 300 calories more, but we choose the foods that we want to avoid. The donuts, the cake, the ice cream, and you name it. We don't choose to eat 300 more calories of the foods that are good for us. So the body is well adjusted, but there are more lifestyle behaviors that can affect our weight. It's not just the food that we choose to eat. Exercise, our level of activity, and our sleep also are to play. But to give you an answer about Ozempic, I know many people are against it. I feel like if someone has a lot of weight, a lot of weight to lose, and they want to experiment with the drug, as they change, as they're changing their lifestyle, I think it's the only way they will be able to succeed, and they may succeed faster because the drug will give them a boost. The drug will help them curb that extra appetite that we know why it's happening. But ideally, you do it in combination with changing what you're eating, when you're eating, looking at your sleep, physical activity, all of those, so that you can wean yourself out of the drug eventually, and then you can keep their weight loss. Otherwise, you're going to be on the drug for the rest of your life. And if that's your choice, then it's your choice. But I'm not going to say anything. We don't know the long-term effects of the drugs because it's relatively new, but I don't boo-hoo anybody for giving it a try if that's what they want to do.
Sure. One more question, because I've kept you over, but I'd love for you to explain, because you are a geneticist. Do people vary genetically in the ability of how much fat they can eat and either be overweight or lean? Because all the wonderful plant-based doctors who I've had on my show who are male, who've never been overweight, who are telling us we got to eat 2 ounces of nuts a day. I can't eat one nut. I mean, I can, but I mean, obviously I can. But every time I experiment with adding nuts or nut butters back, I'll gain 5 pounds like immediately of fat.
Yeah.
So can you talk about a little bit the difference genetically of fat, and maybe people that have already been overweight are different than people that have never been overweight?
Yes, I think this is the key thing for us to remember is this. Women who have been overweight and who are menopausal are very different than men who never have to go through those life stages, never had to go through gaining that amount of fat as we women have to experience, and men who had never had to lose 50 plus pounds many times over in their lifetime. So I do see that it's talking about physiology and metabolism is two different things. And yes, you may not be able to eat more of certain foods and keep your weight off. And it goes more than nuts, AJ. Sometimes people I just want to eat more beans, for example, because I want to up my protein level. They need to do that, but being careful about some other foods that they are eating. I know ladies in our program that say, yeah, if I start eating tortilla chips with no added salt, no added oil, just tortilla chips with avocado, for example, I gain weight. There are specific genes that make people or the body respond differently to a certain amount of fat in the diet as well. So it's just that men and women are different, and period.
Yeah. Is it the chips or is it the avocado though? Because I can I can eat as many. I mean, actually, I had chips for dinner last night, and I'm embarrassed to say we were shooting all day. Fat free. The ones I bake. But Dr.
Yes.
Oliveira, you are just such a delight. I'm so honored that you've taken the time to do this, and I'm so thankful that I live close to you now and get to see you in person occasionally.
Yes, and we get to eat together. So if you're around, if you're in this area, make sure to join Chef AJ's group. And so you're going to have all the support you need and to succeed. And the one thing that I wanted you to take from today's conversation is you're not alone. All women are going to go through all those, at least two of those three big life changes. Even if we choose not to have children, we're still going to go through puberty and menopause, and we're going to see our bodies changing, but we have the tools to succeed, and we have much better way to succeed together, supporting one another than alone. You don't have to do this alone. Come join us and let's do this together.
Thank you so much, Dr. Oliveira.
Okay, bye.
And thanks everyone for watching another episode of Chef AJ and Friends. Please come back Tuesday for Dr. Doug Lyle at 11 a.m. Pacific time, and he will answer your questions.